Paul Bennett is a widely published Halifax author, education consultant, and commentator. His latest strictly history book is entitled Turning Points, 15 Pivotal Moments in Nova Scotia's History. Paul is founding director of Schoolhouse Institute and former adjunct professor of education at St. Mary's University. Over a career spanning 3 decades in 3 different provinces, Ontario, Quebec, and Nova Scotia, Dr. Bennett has written or co-authored 10 books and dozens of articles in both the popular media and the academic press. He is currently the regular education columnist for Brunswick News. As a published historian, Paul is best known across Canada as the author of 3 widely recognized Canadian history textbooks, Canada and North American Nation, Years of Promise, 1896 to 1911, and Emerging Identities, Problems and Interpretations in Canadian History. His 2011 book, Vanishing Schools Threaten Communities, The Contested Schoolhouse in Maritime Canada, was recognized in Acadiensis as one of the top works in Canadian education history. His 10th book, The State of the System, A Reality Check on Canada's Schools, is coming soon from McGill Queen's University Press. So please help me welcome silently our very esteemed guest speaker this evening, Dr. Paul Bennett.
Good evening, and thank you, Sarah, for that very kind introduction. And welcome to my Zoom lecture with the alluring title, The Shifting Axis, inspired by and drawn from my 2019 book, Turning Points in Nova Scotia's History. Let us begin tonight with a quick overview and a collage of pictures. If you look at this collage of images taken from my book, they capture the theme of tonight's lecture, the shifting axis, how Quebec's place evolved and changed over the 150-year history of its participation in Confederation. You see on the left, John Damont's Long Way Home from 2017, the statue of Joseph Howe downtown. On the right, an iconic lighthouse which captures the ethos of our province. Leslie Choice is pictured here, the author of perhaps the best-selling book on our history, Shaped by the Sea, published in 1996. And of course, who could forget that famous pointing stance of Ray Ivany when he launched the One Nova Scotia report in 2014. Nova Scotia has never been a straightforward kind of place. I'm not the first to say that. That's how Halifax author John Damont described the province in his enchanting and really readable 2017 book, The Long Way Home. In that personal memoir, he comes closer, in my estimation, than anyone else to explaining the province's uniqueness and fathoming its emotional pull for all those who call it home. I think John comes off as a bit of a homing pigeon in the book. Now let's turn to some of the background. The province's motto, and I'm going to attempt some Latin, so bear with me. Unit haec altera vincit, one defends and the other conquers, kind of captures that tension in Nova Scotia history. Without an inspiring and onward and upward trajectory that's predictable, the province has and its people have found a way to navigate the ups and downs, the twists and turns that come with being, for most of its history, the easternmost appendage of British North America and later the Dominion of Canada. There's always a search for meaning and identity when it comes to history. And for much of the time of our history, the British colony and later the province of Nova Scotia was viewed, certainly by the rest of the world, as a place of new starts, shaped by the sea, full of shimmering landscapes, but slightly out of step with central Canada and the gospel of material progress. Looking through a Nova Scotian lens, there's another lesson. We followed a different path and always seemed to be, in John Damont's words, on the cusp of something truly big. In that sense, we have much to teach the world about how to persevere through periodic struggles and somehow to find a way forward. Let's take a look at how we're viewed, not only ourselves, but from the outside. Much of the analysis in my book, Turning Points, as you will see, was informed by a close reading of the Atlantic provinces in Confederation, a really indispensable source, which I have took as a kind of a gospel, and I used it in various places throughout the book. It certainly does a great job covering the period from the 1860s to the 1980s. On the right here is a cartoon, a Robert Chambers cartoon from the 1950s, which I snatched from the book. The title says it all. "Oh boy, we can hardly wait." And you have Maritimers perched on a branch, eagerly awaiting the arrival of television, which has arrived in the homes of Ontario and Quebec. I think that says it all about something about our province and this situation in relation to the rest of the country. Well, Joe Howe is someone that looms larger than life in Nova Scotian history. Why is Joseph Howe so revered in Nova Scotia? If Nova Scotia has a patron saint, it would have to be Joseph Howe, the renowned Halifax journalist, newspaper editor, and politician. While Howe was instrumental in the movement for responsible government, he's respected for his defense of the freedom of the press. He's better known outside of our province and the Maritimes as a fierce anti-Confederate who opposed the colony's 1867 entry into the Canadian Federal Union. So he's not viewed as positively outside our province. From his perch at the Morning Herald, he blasted away at Confederation as, quote, a botheration scheme. And he took the case all the way to London in 1866. While it was being signed, it wasn't until then that he ceased and desisted. Leading supporters of Confederation, such as Sir Charles Tupper, remain largely forgotten. But Howe, the contrarian, lives on in the hearts and minds of Nova Scotians. Surely there's something here that speaks to our identity as a people. The shifting axis of Confederation is easy to see when you start looking at the maps. So let's take a look at the map here of, at the time, British North America at the time of Confederation. And Nova Scotia was destined largely by its geography to be the eastern gateway to the continent en route to somewhere else. For much of its existence, Nova Scotia has bobbed around as a colonial possession at the mercy of first European empires, and then as a relatively small province in a dominion that first of all was bent on going inland to central Canada and then turned westward. We were an eastern gateway and then an appendage, and in some ways left behind, as my book indicates. Let's take a look at what the Maritimes looked like in 1867 in the North Atlantic economy. And while this is hard to see, I'll explain a little bit. We were at the height of our economic status at the time of Confederation. In fact, some have said that was the absolute most prosperous time to be Nova Scotian. Here you see the North Atlantic Triangle that was defined and outlined by J.B. Brebner in his book of that title. But you can see how heavily dependent we were on British and Britain for exports and imports. Interestingly enough, you see that our exports at Confederation were iron, coal, fish, and wood, and our imports were almost all finished goods. Even then, we were a little stronger than New Brunswick in the colonial economy. So it gives us a sense of what we were like on the precipice of joining the British North American Union. Now let's look at the Union itself and the map of British North America at Confederation. This is interesting as well because it shows how we were arraigned on the easternmost side of the four original provinces and how much more populous even then Ontario and Quebec or Upper Canada or the Canadas and were in relation to the Maritime provinces. I took a look, knowing that you'd ask me tonight, what was the population of Nova Scotia at Confederation? 330,857 in 1861. Ontario was already 1,396,000, Quebec 1.1 million, and New Brunswick 252,000. And the fastest growing places or colonies were actually Upper Canada, was growing at 4.34% a year, followed by New Brunswick, which it was actually growing at 2.60% per year. Well, what you see here is how the settled already in 1867, the pattern was being set. And the settled areas of British North America were largely already almost concentrated in the Great Lakes, in what we now call Canada, but the United Province of Canada, Upper Canada, Lower Canada, later Quebec and Ontario. My interpretation tonight is really about metropolitanism. And many of you who studied history will remember a very famous historian, JMS Careless, Maurice Careless, who gave us the metropolitan thesis. Well, you can see tonight that I've drawn heavily on the metropolitan thesis. And it's simply this, that Canada evolved in stages from the east to the west, and starting with the dominant commercial centers of Halifax, Quebec, and Montreal, then moving on to Toronto, through the metropolis of Empire, Ontario, and gradually to points west. Donald Creighton called this the commercial empire of the St. Lawrence. JMS Careless tended to extend that to metropolitanism, and he saw a succession of metropolitan developments across Canada from east to west, all the way to the Pacific coast. So much of my thesis tonight is drawing on the metropolis and hinterland thesis of JMS Careless. Let's turn to some of the best known interpretations of Nova Scotia. Perceptions and interpretations of Nova Scotia's history have not only changed over time, but they've certainly reflected a diverse range of historical viewpoints. Let's go back to the beginning. And it seems that we always run into Thomas Chandler Haliburton, and I did as well. I began by looking at some of the earliest histories of our province, and I discovered his early history, which was a Britannic-Canadian colonial vision. It's dating from 1829, and it was written essentially 40 years before Confederation. But what's interesting about Thomas Chandler Haliburton's early history, it's more of a narrative account, and it speaks to Nova Scotia occupying a small place in the great chain of events associated with British discovery and the occupation of the continent. It was steeped in the narrowly white European views of the time, and he saw the story as a small chapter in the slow-moving, conquest by conquest, quote, progress of man from a state of nature towards civilization. Now, we wouldn't want to speak those words today because his relative blindness to the existence and cultural sophistication of indigenous peoples, particularly the Mi'kmaq, Nova Scotia's first inhabitants, would be shocking and truly upsetting by today's standards. Regional protest has figured prominently in histories of Nova Scotia, and it's focused almost entirely on maritime rights movements, a succession of them. And later maritime regional historians tended to situate Nova Scotia within a regional protest and resistance tradition. Regional disparities loom large in the analysis of these popular and scholarly historians who sought to explain the sources of the region's economic difficulties following Confederation and extending into the post-World War II years. They were heavily influenced by the dominance of central Canadian titans like Prime Minister Louis Saint Laurent's Minister of Everything, C.D. Howe, who had a real dim view of the Maritimes. He considered the Maritimes to be the epitome of backwardness and is shown in its local people and their institutions. What I found interesting about C.D. Howe was he was born in Waltham, Massachusetts, and he represented Port Arthur in the House of Commons. But he continued to have a really strong Central Canadian stereotype of the Maritime provinces. Maritime provinces were considered to be conservative in relation to, say, the West. Atlantic Canadian historian David Frank aptly described this perspective as the blame the victim syndrome. In other words, the Maritimes were a have-not region, and perhaps deservedly so. This sounds unkind, but it was essentially the interpretation brought by many from outside our region. Nova Scotia in particular was painted with the brush of maritime conservatism, which dampened entrepreneurial spirit and gave comfort to timidity and dependence upon the region's business community. The cartoon on the left, I think, shows this well. It's one of the best known cartoons. It's in my book, of course, but it reinforced the perception, because here you have maritime businessmen boarding a train to central Canada, and they look like they're going cap in hand to Ottawa. This, I think, reinforced the stereotype and allowed it to grow. One of the greatest discoveries I had in writing the book was I discovered F.B. McCurdy and Nova Scotia rights. I'd heard about it, but doing the research for the book really drove the point home. I found a small pamphlet in the archives, which was produced on September 15th, 1924. And what a read that is. It's entitled Nova Scotia's Right to Live. And it demonstrated that Nova Scotia's problems with Confederation were far from resolution in the 1920s. Written by a well-heeled Halifax financier, F.B. McCurdy, the tract made a stirring case for Nova Scotia to, quote, claim its fair share of the Commonwealth. Alarmed by the westward shift in the axis of Confederation and frustrated by a federation enacting tribute to Ontario and Quebec, he suggested that Nova Scotians again consider secession as a remedy of last resort. The pamphlet makes for great reading because it's the most radical expression of maritime rights, a protest movement which surfaced in Nova Scotia and the neighboring provinces in the years after the Great War. But unlike the Prairie West, where post-war protests produced brand new political parties and radical movements, the regional discontent was channeled here through the traditional party system, championed by the federal and regional conservative parties' politicians. So it lacked the staying power of third-party movements. And here I should note that William H. Dennis of the Halifax Herald was instrumental in this and was very active in the Conservative Party. So again, reinforcing the conservative nature of protest in our region. Well, it came time to challenge the maritime stereotypes and to find something more in terms of our regional identities. And thankfully, Ernie Forbes of the University of New Brunswick spent much of his career challenging those long-standing myths in a series of influential books and articles, shedding new light on the legitimate grievances of Maritimers and the sources of robust regional identities in Nova Scotia and the neighboring maritime provinces. What's interesting about this is he used the term Maritimes and seems to pick whichever province he needs to make the case that there was a strong identity, because it waxed and waned and ebbed and flowed in each of the different provinces. A more recent short history of Nova Scotia that doesn't get a lot of credit, but should, is John Reed's 2009 Nova Scotia, A Pocket History. And I read it with interest because it really does build upon Forbes's regional studies, dispels the persistent myths of backwardness, and provides a welcome antidote for the kind of historical amnesia that leaves, and this is John's words, stumbling around in the dark, trying to find our way forward. Let's take a moment and look at our license plates and Canada's ocean playground imagery. Nova Scotia's brand identity is neatly captured on the license plates, which we all know celebrate Canada's ocean playground. Of course, the stunning ocean coastline and the crossroads location on the Atlantic world made it a premier tourist destination for visitors from around the world. And of course, even today, reenactments at Halifax Citadel, monuments to the 1917 Explosion, Pier 21, postcards of Peggy's Cove Lighthouse, and of course the Blue Nose. These are all cultivating a tourist image of our province that is probably better known than anything else. But it also relies heavily on the constructing and marketing of the province's history. Well, it was time to unmask that history, and in 2010, who else but Ian Mackay produced the book that called into question a lot of previous assumptions about Nova Scotia history. The title of it says it all, and the image on that cover, which is shown here, is really good because it captures, in a sense, the whole notion of the tourist promotion of Nova Scotia, or as Ian Mackay described it, the commodification of Nova Scotia. And it became the stuff of provincial promotional ventures. And he goes back to the two of them, it's Robin Bates and Ian Mackay, go back to Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's 1849 epic poem, Evangeline, and then he goes well into the 20th century. He peels away layers of mythology, and what do we see? We see, I guess, our province a little clearer with not as much of a honey coating. Tartanism and folklore are very much a part of the ethos of Nova Scotia. And during the pandemic, we even saw tartan masks were broken out and lots of people were wearing them. So tartanism may well be still with us in Nova Scotia. And Nova Scotia's Scottish tradition was touted by Premier Angus L. MacDonald and dubbed Tartanism because it depicted a certain way of looking at Nova Scotia, New Scotland. And Tartanism, according to Ian Mackay, was part of the fabrication of a folklore tradition and was largely commodified for tourism purposes. Everyone comes in for critical analysis in Mackay's The Province of History, including Thomas Head Riddell. He's presented as an emissary of a tourist-driven industry which celebrates, quote, Scottish folk tales and exalts whiteness while virtually ignoring ethnic minorities, women, and working class people. Incidentally, in preparing for tonight, I came back and I thought, I wonder how long we've had a provincial tartan. Well, it was 1963, designed by Bessie Murray, and it was registered in 1956. So, yes, Angus L. MacDonald was part of tartanism, and very much even when you consider those particular examples. Much of the popular history of our province, if you go to airports or go down around Pier 21, you're going to see romantic visions of Nova Scotian history writ large. And telling the story of Nova Scotia has also attracted its share of romantics. None more than Leslie Choice in his 1996 book, Nova Scotia Shaped by the Sea. Writing with rare literary flair, he provides a compelling and alluring personal interpretation that reads like an extended metaphor. It starts on the shores and it winds its way through the history and then ends back on the sand dunes near Lawrencetown where he lives. Nova Scotia is Canada's last best hope, according to Choice, and still relatively undiscovered place that is shaped by the sea. Here's a quotation that I highlight for you from the book. Every state or province undoubtedly nurtures loyalty to its soil, but a land nearly surrounded by water and steeped in a history of the sea suggests kinship between the salt in the blood and the salt in the air. That is imaginative prose if I ever read it. The allure of Nova Scotia is there's something more to it. It's kind of a refuge from the excesses of North American life. And it must be noted that you must know that Leslie Choice was an American expatriate, and he looks at Nova Scotia from the eyes of an American who's chosen Nova Scotia as an adopted home. I'm not going to suggest he's Nova Scotia's de Tocqueville, but in actual fact, you can read him that way when you look at his books. There's a great quotation in Shaped by the Sea, and I think it's aimed at us, historians and those who love history. Historians often speak with some despair of the province as a place that has been out of step with major industrial development and the inherent blessings that come along with that. There is, for me, however, great comfort in this thought that the world has passed us by. Now I can live here with fewer frills, fewer distractions, a limited amount of noise, and observe the madness from a distance. I think that in COVID times rings very true. Now, the past is prologue, and my book ends with a rather controversial chapter on Ray Ivany's vision for Nova Scotia's future. Believe it or not, it was 6 years ago that the Nova Scotia Commission on the New Economy, headed by then Acadia University President Ray Ivany, staked out a very different vision of the province's present and future. I happened to be there, and I was standing about 10 feet from him when he gave this address. And I took special note of how firm he was that we had to change our ways. He spun out an alarming cycle of decline and looked at our past, present, and future strictly on terms of our economic progress. As Professor Jerry Bannister observed, the Ivany report is, quote, history drained of politics. In actual fact, there is no disagreements about anything in the Ivany report. There's almost an impression that there's a consensus that we need to make changes and in the direction that he recommended. It came as a cold shower, but whether it changed the province's trajectory is still being debated, and most people think not a whole lot. One profoundly important comment uttered by author John Dumont seemed to capture the mood. It's a great place here, there's no denying that, but it is hard slogging here. It has always been. Those are very true words spoken by John Dumont. Let's go back to my book for a moment. Searching for turning points in Nova Scotia's history begins, I think, with identifying and assessing events of some historical significance. And what I did in writing turning points is I had the temerity and the probably foolishness to identify 20 turning points, and then I reduced them down to 12, and I wrote the series for the Halifax Chronicle Herald, which was called Turning Points. And then in writing the book, I expanded it to 15. Now, the province's entry into Confederation in the 1860s was a natural for a turning point. So were the flirtations with secession in the 1880s, the brush with maritime rights in the 1920s, and the role of the two 20th century world wars. They stand out as pivotal junctures when Nova Scotia was at the center of things and when a lot of the debate was focused on what we were doing. What makes them turning points, in my view, is that they represent a historical moment when a decisive change takes place, affecting the province's destiny and place in the larger world. Now, scanning the historical landscape, it's possible to identify other equally pivotal points which signified longer-term social, cultural, and economic changes. That's the challenge that I took on in the book, and I throw out to you tonight. Now, finding a narrative thread in Nova Scotia history isn't as easy as you think, because there have been very few actual narratives written solely about Nova Scotia. In fact, even if you take Margaret Conrad's histories, they're about the Maritime region or the Atlantic region. So trying to focus on Nova Scotia isn't entirely easy. So I didn't have much to go on. So from the 150-year period, from the 1860s to the near present, I decided that the shifting axis of east-west development was a connecting tissue or a narrative thread. The older Scottish-Canadian tradition of Tartanism gradually faded, and Nova Scotianness found expression in different ways in a more diverse, tolerant, and accepting maritime society and culture. The featured episodes and turning points in Nova Scotia's history are really just part of a much larger picture. And this talk is intended to start a conversation of where we are, where we've been, and where we're headed in the years ahead. Now, needless to say, my perspective needs to be challenged, and it's already being challenged in academia and in the public square. So let's take a look at what's happened in the almost 2 years since I started work on this book. Well, the 150th anniversary of Confederation came and went, and we all of a sudden discovered we're celebrating 150 years, but as Margaret Conrad illustrated in this essay in Atlantic Books Today, published afterwards in Acadiensis, Canada had a sticky, messy history, much messier and much stickier than we realize. And you notice the question mark there. How do we frame our historical analysis? Is it within a 150-year time span in terms of Confederation, or does it go back much, much further in time? And those are the kinds of questions that are coming to the fore now. Should we go back and write Indigenous peoples into our history? If so, how? A second point here is reframing our history going back to the land of the Mi'kmaq. Can we incorporate Indigenous origins, contributions, and provocations into our history? I've done a little of that in probing the origins of hockey and gone back to the Indigenous origins of hockey, and I've given talks and published on that subject. But what it did was open my eyes to the fact that virtually everything can be reinterpreted with a little different lens. So let's see what would happen if we were to reimagine history through a different looking glass. Because as we know, the sweep of history is much broader than just 150 years of Confederation. In fact, the Mi'kmaq claim that it goes back 13,500 years. And what I learned through a lot of my research recently is something which we could all learn from is two-eyed seeing, two ways of seeing and knowing, the Indigenous way and the Western, an established way of looking at things. It's possible to look at the same things and see them from two different vantage points. But we should be more aware of the differences and trying to find a way to accommodate them. My last slide tonight is really about the Cornwallis controversy. And I've been asked, I've done a lot of interviews on this book, I've been on radio, television, why is the Cornwallis controversy in there? And I said, well, because it's a book of history, and this is a critical turning point for historians. This is a critical question when all the issues came to the fore and were focused on one monument, one statue, and what happened to it. For once, we learned that history matters and figures in the ongoing debate and the conversation that we're likely to have tonight. And it involves rethinking how we've always looked at things. Doesn't mean we change them, but incorporating those new perspectives into how we face the future. And that, I would say, is a change in my attitude towards the history of Nova Scotia since I wrote the book. I want to close with a shameless self-promotion for Turning Points. Tonight's talk gives you a taste of my book, Turning Points, and the ways it contributes to larger debates about the full sweep of Nova Scotian history. I'll be honest with you, I was disappointed that the book did not attract more attention for the opening introduction, which was essentially a historiography of Nova Scotia. No one commented on it, even though I worked harder on that than I did on identifying the various turning points. And I will say this, we find it easy to identify turning points and events and pivotal events. We find it much, much more challenging to step back and say, how does this all fit together? And what does it mean in totality? I hope I've helped tonight to put you in the picture, stimulate some discussion. And I want to thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight.
Great. I guess I will, this is Shirley Tillotson here. I will start my video up. And, right. Thanks a lot, Paul. It reminded me that having joined the Nova Scotia Historical Society, I do so as a learner, as a historian of Canada that has done a little bit of Nova Scotian history. And I know some of those books you've drawn on well, and others I don't, so I have some reading to do. So there will be questions from other people in the audience if they can find the chat function. I just want to remind people how to find the chat function. There are two ways. If you're working from a tablet or a phone, then when you touch your screen, you will see three little dots. If you click on those three dots, it'll give you a drop-down menu that will show chat as an option. If you're on a laptop or a desktop, move your cursor over the bottom of the screen and you'll see chat as one of the options. Click there and type something addressed to everyone in the meeting or to Paul or to me and Paul. I'm going to just now send a message to everyone in the meeting so that you can see maybe it'll show the little chat icon appear on the bottom. A little number should appear on the bottom of your screen showing a message. Okay, so while you're testing out the chat option, I will ask the question that I've been trying to formulate as I listen to Paul, aside from, recognizing my own inadequacies as a historian of Nova Scotia. I'm not, I guess I can understand the moment when you were working on this book, what you were engaging with, and I appreciate what you're saying about the period since you published the book, the kind of shift in your perspective on what putting together a provincial history might mean, that that two-eyed seeing, as an expression that you seem to have taken from a Mi'kmaq cultural framework. I know it in philosophy as binocular vision. There's a lot of scholarly, intellectual, cultural weight or credibility behind this idea that that democracy, that social justice, that peace, that all these good things depend on us being able to see the world in two kinds of ways. So I want to, acknowledge the importance of that note in your conclusion. And I want to raise it from that kind of point of view, raise the question of the narrative trajectory that you found yourself looking for. You wanted to find one, you put one together, but in course design, I've often told students, we're not going to do this entirely as a beginning, middle, end thing, because different points of view mean different chronologies matter. And so I guess if you were going to go at this again, what would it look like to say have three different chronologies speaking to each other in a book, or two or four, pick your number. Can you talk a little bit about how you now try to have something that still had the drive of narrative, but that wasn't uni-perspectival, that actually had two or 3 points of view in it?
That's a really complicated question, and I expect nothing less from you, Shirley. I will say this, that I think you go out on a limb when you put a narrative out there, and in many ways you're looking for people to challenge it and rethink the way they're looking at But I basically had a lot of the field to myself, because you're putting out something in a field that doesn't have a whole lot of narratives that have been reduced down to Nova Scotia. So it's one of the first attempts to try to do this in recent times anyway. And, you know, for example, John Reed's book fades out as it gets closer to the present. There's not a whole lot in the 20th century. You know, there's not much to go on. And you'd be really hard-pressed to find any narrative threads running through some of the other works that I consulted, including Margaret Conrad's. What I really meant there about the two-eyed seeing is, for example, if I was to take another look at Confederation, I think I'd be more attuned to the Aboriginal presence in Confederation. I'm not suggesting I go back, although people have said, are you going to do another one on, you know, turning points over the whole span of Nova Scotia's history? Well, I might, but I'm probably running out of time. I really meant that I think I could have done a better job of teasing out the Indigenous perspectives in each of those themes. I did insist on putting a major turning point in there that surprised a lot of people. I put in the Mi'kmaq Education Authority as a breakthrough in education. And it looks a little bit, I mean, maybe strained a bit, but it was me trying to do what I could. And some people who read my series in the Herald will notice that the series as it originally was published was very heavy on political, military, and economic themes. And when we went to the book, we put more social themes. We fleshed it out with some of the things that were missing in the original 12. And, you know, I'm very proud of the chapter I wrote on, you know, on Viola Desmond. I think and I can tell you that Irvine Carvery and all the Carvery family thought I did a good job. And I'm very proud of, some have said my chapter on Savage Revolution is one of the best, including Mike Savage. He called me and talked to me about it. And I've had a lot of feedback on my chapter on Stanfield, because I think I've restored him to a place that maybe he'd been forgotten in recent times. So that's going off in different directions. I think what I'm suggesting is I would probably bulk up things that are related to Indigenous perspectives, and maybe, you know, put something in about residential schools. Could have done the Shubenacadie School. You know, that's an obvious thing. So, but that's what comes from reflecting on what you've written and how you could improve it the next time.
Great. I mean, I think that you know, books exist to make conversation with, so that's a good result. So I have two questions that are kind of related. One that asks, what would you say is the most pivotal point? And the other says, which of the ones that you've identified do you think Nova Scotians today think is most pivotal? So is there any space between the one that you think matters the most and what Nova Scotians today, and I gotta add something, because it was, people will see Bertram McDonald post the second one. To make it so there's your point of view of the most pivotal, there's Nova Scotians today, and Bertram says also is the one that's most pivotal different in conversations today than earlier?
Changes over time. I've been asked this question a lot, and I said that I really thought the decision to go into Confederation in the first place deserves primacy, because it was so, there was so much division. There wasn't a consensus, and particularly because it continued to be a matter of ongoing debate and dissent for 50 years. I mean, the decision wasn't really made in the 1860s. There were continual movements to try to revisit it, to have secession, to have repeal. So I really feel that's a critical point, the decision itself to go into Confederation. In terms of the overall impact of, say, the province in the totality of Canada, I'd say the Second World War. I've spoken on this subject. I think because we were really at the center of the Second World War, I think that's critical. And if you were to ask people outside the country, that would be, or outside the region, I think you'd find that that would be important. As time's gone on, things loom larger in importance. And, you know, I think the raising of Africville and how we dealt with our Black population, I think is hugely important now. It continues to be a matter that I think tears at our conscience. So you can't really ignore that. I would say that today has come to the fore. The Cornwallis debate is really about history, how you define it. And I'm sure, I see Leo DeVoe is in the audience, I'm sure he's got some opinions. One of the things I did with the Cornwallis is I tried to be balanced and fair and represent all sides. I found very, very few things that did so. So I'm proud of the fact that you've got, whatever your point of view, you can find something in that chapter on try to recognize all different perspectives on it, which I think in some ways is what you try to do as a historian.
Okay, great. I see here another question, which is a complex one. Serves me right for asking complex questions. So I think I'll read it because I don't want to summarize and get it wrong. From Sarah Beelands. We've been led to believe it's true that Ray Ivany's assertive report was universally accepted as the necessary way forward for Nova Scotia. Well, there are a number of us who were struck by Ivany's total neglect of the possibility of approaching our demographic crisis by, and here she says, by more than sudden mass immigration. So additional ways other than sudden mass immigration. No doubt, Nova Scotia has benefited greatly from immigration over the past 50 years, both from outside the country and from other parts of the country. But perhaps governments in Nova Scotia might consider more family-friendly policies, sometimes sneeringly referred to as natalism, that would encourage Nova Scotia citizens to undertake the hard slog of bearing and raising children, as well as paying attention to the encouragement of small business. Local initiatives that might keep some of those children here in the province. Okay, so your historical perspective on whether the failures of, whether a little bit of natalism and better development policies might do at least as much as encouraging immigration to develop the province.
First of all, I think I overestimated the importance of Ray Ivany's report. It's amazing 6 years on how you can see things differently. And I try to suggest in the book that, you know, in hindsight, you get more perspective. And I think I overestimated the importance. But what I saw it as is a debate over the economic choices that Nova Scotians faced. And Karen Foster, for example, from Dalhousie, has written quite persuasively on the fact that Ivany focused almost exclusively on prosperity and export development and not on other things, you know, and not sort of import substitution and things like developing the rural and agricultural economy. I must say, Sarah, I've never heard anyone make the point you have. That is a very interesting point. And I would say—
it was actually Sarah's point. She wrote a chat.
I would say this, though. It sounds a bit like Quebec. You know, it sounds like, you know, developing yourself. But there are authors, and there are many who think local development, local markets, doing local development is preferable. In fact, I had a report that I gave to Ivany where I said that we needed to focus on localities and develop things, smaller communities and community hubs. So I was in the camp that thought we should develop small entities and develop social enterprise. And I think he really missed the boat on that.
Okay, I will resist my own tendency to jump in and ask another question from, this one is from John Reed, identified as such. As one sport historian to another, John says he's wondering in what ways, as well, of course, as regarding the Mi'kmaq history of hockey, which you've rightly noted, in what ways you would see sport history as contributing to our understanding of Nova Scotia history?
Well, as much as I'd like to say this, I think it's tough to shoehorn it in a book where you have to pick 15 pivotal events. I think I should step back and say if it went to say 20, I think I probably could find something there. And but again, every time you revisit the choices, you come up with something different. I'd be interested in what John would say about that, because he knows an awful lot about sports history. And I'm sure that the two of us over a coffee could come up with something there. That's the best I can do tonight.
Okay, all right. I'm looking for another question. Oh, here we go. Here's another one that's not from Sarah Beanlands, but she's forwarded it. Oh, it's from Leo DeVoe. In your analysis of turning points, did you dig into the role of institutions such as universities, churches, temperance groups, suffragists, who were influential in various ways?
Good point, Leo. I think I could have looked harder into some of the social movements that have animated our history. But I guess I more or less accepted that they were more conservative here. For example, the suffragist movement here, as much as I've tried to find something that was much more, shall we say, radical or assertive, I think it does fit into that stereotype of them being more conservative than you would find elsewhere. And in fact, when Heidi MacDonald gave her presentation, I gave her a bit of a hard time, because I just did not see the Maritime movement as being as radical as she was implying. Maybe in terms of, in relation to the rest of the population, but I think a lot of those movements were relatively conservative in relation to other places in Canada. And I guess you could see I bring a pan-Canadian perspective to bear on everything I do. It's kind of because Nova Scotia is my adopted home. So I tend to have a bigger perspective on a lot of things.
Okay, thank you. I realize that this formula, one of the things we're not getting is that sometimes there's a follow-up question when the speaker responds to a question. And so, you know, we're feeling our way here. If anyone wants to jump in with a second question that's a follow-up, I'll keep an eye out for that. And meanwhile, I'll go back to the list of what we've got coming in here. John McLeod asks, if a turning point is when what happened, if a turning point is when what happened radically changed the future, where does the deportation fit? Would we have been the eastern part of Quebec?
Good point, John. And you know that I dance around in the book as to what I mean by turning points. I continue to be a little bit confused and confusing on that subject. And I oscillate between, is it a point at which the trajectory changes, or is it a time and place or an event which draws attention to the wider world, to Nova Scotia? Or is it something which is a bit of a milestone in the history of our province and our region? And he's identified population shifts, if I understand the question correctly, as being dramatically important. And it's interesting, it doesn't fit so neatly within the event formula that I used there. So I probably, you know, longer term population flows, deportations and things are awfully hard to factor into it. Of course, going back, if it was to start from the beginning of our history, of course, there'd be much more on the Acadians. I was asked a question on Cape Breton radio about where are the Acadians in this book. And of course, there's not a whole lot. So there's a huge weakness in the book. And I said, you know, it's one of the things I would like to add. So I would say, I said, my answer to the question was a caller on Information Morning, Cape Breton, was if I'd started earlier, it would have been no question. There would have been much more on the Acadians, the deportation, and so on.
So this actually fits well with the question from Sarah Holland, I think, because what you're talking about is how different topics become more or less important because of the narrative framing. So, you know, if you begin in the 1860s, you lose a certain amount of the Acadian narrative. Their chronology is one in which the 18th century is very important. So she says, Sarah Holland asks, back to the narrative thread idea, and she wants to focus particularly on tourism. Do you have examples for the fading of Tartanism and the moving towards more diverse, tolerant, and accepting society? Is that in tourism or is that somewhere else? She would say that in much of current tourism promotion, there's still a heavy emphasis on traditional tourism images, tartan, the folk, traditional. Although the current day tourism promotion does have some different diverse perspectives. But has the folk really faded? A bit, a lot?
From the Halifax perspective, yes. But when you go out, as I do, studying school closures, and you visit the smaller and smaller places across Nova Scotia, you realize, my goodness, there are two Nova Scotias. And I would say Halifax is very metrocentric in its outlook, and Tartanism isn't nearly as embraced, certainly outside certain circles. But the further you go from, say, the metropolis of Halifax into the hinterlands, the more you realize there's still evidence of it. And it speaks to the demographics and so on. So a fair question. I think Sarah's identified that was more conjecture. I don't have a whole lot of evidence to support that. I would only say that I reached that conclusion looking at popular culture and vernacular culture and seeing, you know, it's just not that present. And you hear a lot of discussion about it's hokey. Right? And it's certainly certain age groups, that's kind of the attitude. So I think that's true. But it is an assertion that probably needs more research and evidence behind it. I think Sarah knows that. I think she's a specialist on tourism, if I'm not mistaken.
As someone who's just about to go to Cape Breton for a vacation, I'm really feeling the weight of the Cape Breton Tartanism in the Nova Scotia tourism. Okay, Nicole, Meatbee, I was interested in your comment about the introduction of the book, and I think the historiographical element. You said it didn't get as much attention as you would have liked, and she wants to know what you'd like us to have gotten to notice about the introduction. So it's a question allowing you to expatiate on your.
Thank you, Nicole, for that question, because you know, I found everyone wanted to argue about the turning points. They wanted to debate the merits of my choices. They got right into the weeds. Very few people even noticed that I tried to provide some kind of a framework, basically trying to sketch out how it all fit together. And I was disappointed. And, you know, I even talked to Leslie Choice, and I tried to get him interested in it. And I think it just might be that people are a little bit shy about talking about some of these issues. And I thought it was worth debating, but I didn't get, in the public domain, no one picked it up. And that's why when I first talked to John Grant about the possibility of giving a lecture, I said, you know, I'd really like to do it on that first chapter, because it just didn't get the attention I think it deserved when the book was out. So thank you for asking. That's my explanation.
Thank you. So I have both a follow-up from Sarah Hollett, and here's something that's a great feature of Zoom. We have a footnote from Bertram McDonald, the librarian can never resist. He's offered a reference on two-eyed seeing, an article by Denny and Fanning, 2016 in Indigenous Policy Journal. So if you want to see the two-eyed seeing applied to salmon governance in Nova Scotia, there it is. So everyone, Bertram addressed it to everyone, and you can find it in the Zoom meeting comments. Now, where's Sarah Hollett's second comment? Ah, there it is. Sarah says she thinks that as long as the folk sells, it'll be used. Back to economic precariousness, tourism just can't afford to cast it off completely. As much as that would actually represent real society here. Yeah, you can almost always explain things in Nova Scotia by there's not enough money. Okay, it's a good comment, which I felt impelled to share. Okay. Other questions we've heard from John Reed. Who else is out there? Here's the teacher in me saying, who else would I like to hear from? I promise I won't put you on the spot.
Anyone can always just send me a question. I'd be glad to have a conversation with them or give me a call.
Right.
Maybe we'll make that possible if anybody. It's not exactly a format that lends itself to people feeling like they sometimes want to ask questions.
Well, it's true, you know. Oh, wait, there is another question, which is from, Claudine, who wants to hear you talk a bit about the photography for the book. Now, I haven't seen it, but I know that choosing photographs is a really interesting and challenging part. So talk about what your criteria were and what the constraints were, maybe.
Well, thank you for that. I'm a textbook writer. I've written some of Canada's better known textbooks, and one of the things I learned in writing textbooks is you better find an illustration. And there's a famous statement that let's put it this way: a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, it's worth more than that when you are trying to engage an audience. So one of the first things I did with this book was I decided that I wanted to go with McIntyre Purcell, which I considered to be a publisher that took seriously visual images. And I was fortunate to have a fellow that worked with me on the illustrations, so we got them sharp. But I'm proud to say that I did all the research myself on all of the photos through archives. And I was always looking for a photo that captured the moment and fit in. So one of the comments we've had about the book is just how superb the photos are. But an author is always self-critical. I think we missed it completely on the cover. I think the cover I don't think it does justice to the book. But the illustrations inside and the photos, I mean, I'm telling you, I'm very proud of the work we did. And I was assisted by a very, very fine editor, and Dennis Cunningham, who has a real knack for clarifying the pictures. So we took pictures that were fuzzy and we made them clear. And I think it was his idea to have each chapter with a striking photo at the beginning, and that we could highlight. And it's actually an excellent book for teaching. In fact, at Dalhousie, I've been told that professors were using it in their courses because it's so easy to teach with this book, because it's got all of the documents and tremendous visual imagery, and we work very hard at making sure that we're properly documented to all the sources. So I think, and at the end of every chapter, there's the 5 sources that jumped out at me as being the most influential on each topic. And, it's funny, I kept going back to P.B. Waite. You realize how important someone is when you go through a book like this and you think, under each topic, what was the most influential book written? And, he's down there. And what's interesting is you looking through the little bibliographies at the end of each chapter, you can see how dominant some a few of our historians have been in telling the story of various different events.
Okay, one last call. Further questions? Paul has generously offered to be available for further conversation. We're going to put this up on Facebook, and that'll be one public venue where people can engage if they like. Anything else that's just burning a hole in anyone's brain that they have to get out tonight? I think we're good. Okay. Well, you've worked hard and effectively to launch us in our new mode of communications this fall. Paul. Thank you, and thanks also to Sarah Hollett in the background, Sarah Beanlands, and Vice President of Publicity Tanya for helping to make this launch pretty smooth. And thank you all for showing up and engaging. We will be doing this again next month, October 21st. Patrick Lacroix, new to Halifax in the last couple of years. I met him online as a Twitter historian, on Twitter. He's an expert in the history of Francophone outmigration, and he's going to give us a paper that compares the Quebec and Nova Scotian context for the late 19th century outmigrations. So that's what's on next month, and I hope we'll see you again then. Thank you, Paul, and we're going to take a break now. Sarah Hollett is going to put up a little intermission symbol, and in 5 minutes, which will be 8:17, we're going to regather to do our first ever remote annual general meeting. So we'll see you all shortly.